Hello, everyone. Welcome to episode 1 of our first ever back to school marketing binge watch, where you can watch episodes one at a time or binge them all at once. Today, we are going to be talking about audience targeting in a privacy first world. And your teachers for today are myself. Hi, I'm Natalie Scherer. I'm the SVP of marketing here at Rise. I'm responsible for making sure that our agency is on the cutting edge of all of tomorrow's solutions. And today, that's going to be audience targeting. And I'm joined by our VP of Media Strategy, Justin Garvin, who will be taking over about halfway through today's content. The plan for today is to explain in a very approachable and accessible format. We are going to try to define every acronym that we can. What is going on with data privacy? So we'll do an overview of the laws, the key players, the changes. We're going to compartmentalize them into the different drivers of what's happening. Then we're going to talk about some of the new solutions and measurement tools that are being released to help work around some of the changes that are going on with data privacy. And then we're going to put all of those tools and solutions into a framework that we are using here at Rise to help our clients think about how you should structure your audience targeting strategy tomorrow, depending on your business goals and needs. And so we're going to jump in with the 101 level overview of what's changing with data privacy. Data privacy is the topic that, if you're subscribed to any marketing or advertising periodical, you're hearing about on pretty much a daily basis in some form or another. There are new headlines every day about different key players making different partnerships and moves and capabilities. And it's a lot to keep track of for those of us who spend a lot of time thinking about it. And it's a lot to keep track of if it's not something that is part of your day-to-day reading. And on top of all of the different changes that we are hearing about, of course, in the time since we originally put this content together, Google has delayed the third-party cookie deprecation to 2024. But honestly, that doesn't change anything as it relates to the importance of this topic and for brands to start thinking today about how they're going to build robust, future-proof audience targeting strategies that are privacy first and customer-centric. So a very relevant topic, whether the cookie officially leaves us next year or the year after. As you saw on the previous slide with all of the different headlines, a lot of these changes are unfolding in real time. We are co-answering questions with the partners and vendors that we are talking to and asking questions of. This idea of a cookieless world didn't even exist as a search term from a search volume standpoint, even just a few years ago. So these are concepts that are new, and we're all figuring it out together as we go. The one commonality that we'll talk a lot about today and will be kind of a common denominator of the topics of why data privacy has become so important recently is this idea of customer consent and making sure that brands are being transparent with customers about what data they're collecting, how they're using that data, what the value is to the customer in exchange for that data, and that this is all done in a very transparent and customer-centric way. When we think about the topic of today, which is audience targeting in a privacy-first world, a lot of the way that we hear this question from clients is, what's the cookieless world look like? And we want to make sure to cover that the cookieless world is actually a bit of a misnomer, because third-party cookies are just one of many of the different dynamics at play when it comes to data privacy and audience targeting. And so we're going to go around this circle and talk about a few of those different buckets of topics that sometimes get a bit conflated. And the first is laws and legislation. So GDPR, or the General Data Protection Regulation, is a European law that first came into effect in 2018. It's been followed by a US-based act in California, the California Consumer Privacy Act, which has some similarities, but isn't exactly the same as GDPR. And we'll talk about these laws in a little bit more detail in a coming slide. But that was kind of the beginning of this big movement, was there were actual legislative bodies making rules about how customer data could be collected and used. The next big change that happened was when Apple rolled out their app tracking transparency, which impacted and gave customers the ability to opt out of having their identifier for advertisers used to track their activity across apps. And that is a different change than Google announcing that it will be sunsetting third-party cookies. Third-party cookies have actually been gone from a lot of browsers already. Chrome is the last one to join on with the trend, and that's not happening now until 2024. But there's a lot of new solutions that are being developed as a reaction to third-party cookies going away. And then the final topic that often gets thrown into the mix here is this whole walled garden phenomenon. And this has to do with the rise of companies like Facebook and Google, and now even retail companies like Amazon or Home Depot, leveraging the first-party data that they have about customers and using it as a tool to sell to advertisers to serve targeted ads. And we'll talk more in detail about each of these changes in the coming slides, but it's very important to recognize that they are not all the same, and they all have kind of different flavors and causes and effects that we need to be thinking about as we future-proof our strategies. Just quickly touching on sort of what does GDPR and CCPA say for those who may be less familiar. A couple key points, the first being consent, giving customers the ability to either expressly opt in or just giving the option to opt out, depends on which law that you are looking at. And the other big portion of these laws is giving consumers both transparency into how their data is being used and the option to access their data and be removed and cleansed from brands' databases. There's also laws around how brands have to handle the security of the customer data that they carry. It's a little bit more behind the scenes. When we think about the app tracking transparency change from Apple, we're all very familiar with the prompt of, do we ask app to track or not allow them to track? What really this does for individuals who say, I do not want my activity tracked across apps, is it breaks the feedback loop for advertisers when an individual engages with an ad on the ad platform, leaves the ad platform to make a purchase or take an action on a brand website. For those who are opted in, there's a feedback loop that can still be seen where advertisers can connect to that individual action that took place on Facebook to the reaction or next action that took place on the brand website. But when you opt out, that feedback loop is what is broken. Now we can talk about third-party cookies, and I didn't mention this in the upfront, but the topics that we chose for this series are all of the most asked questions and even how our clients and prospects are asking us about them. And as I mentioned, it tends to start with third-party cookies, but as you just saw, and we'll continue to see, this is really only part of the story of having a privacy-first audience strategy. But as it relates to third-party cookies have been the vehicle for a long time to allow brands to reach customers when they have left their website domain and gone on to another website. And so this is the classic example of, I browsed the running shoes on the running shoe store site, and then they followed me around the internet in perpetuity forever. Of course, savvy advertisers have more sophisticated strategies than that, but that's essentially what the third-party cookie has facilitated to date. It's also been a common denominator that has been used in multi-touch attribution. And so when third-party cookies do eventually go away, those models are going to be less reliable. And then we have the walled garden phenomenon, which the importance of the data that different walled gardens have, Google, Amazon, and Facebook being the largest and most talked about for a long time, is that when a user is logged in to Facebook or to Amazon, they are giving these platforms the ability to see what they're interested in based on their behavior. So when I log into Amazon, Amazon knows what products I'm browsing, which ones I'm spending more time with, how often I'm revisiting a certain product page. And based on that information, they can infer certain attributes about me and my intent to purchase a product or a different upsold product and what have you. And so advertisers have been able to take advantage of these unique insights that each of these different walled gardens have. And the whole idea with the walled garden is that the data that is captured typically resides and stays within the walled garden. When we have Justin talk to us a little bit about the future of audience targeting, there is kind of a 2.0 to this story, especially as it relates to data that Amazon is gathering and how they are monetizing it. And because the value of this data is even higher than it was before when we think about third-party cookies going away and giving brands the ability to reach customers with known attributes. There have been many more walled garden players that have entered the story within the last few years. So this is everything from social platforms like Snapchat or TikTok that have different user bases that are engaging with different types of content. So those walled gardens have different insights, all the way to retail companies like Target, Home Depot, Walmart, Kroger. That is the marketplaces or retail media phenomenon that you've likely read about. And I'm going to close this section with an interesting Wall Street Journal headline that came out a couple months ago at this point about Marriott. And so when we think about brands monetizing the unique data sets that they have based on the customer insights they know when customers are on their websites or in their apps, it's typically been in the e-commerce space. But this move by Marriott shows that brands like hotels that have robust loyalty data are figuring out ways that they can monetize that information too on the properties that they have to serve ads. And so Marriott announced that they're rolling out their own media network to serve inventory on their hotel TV screens and other places within the Marriott hotel ecosystem that one could serve ads. This is a very interesting phenomenon, certainly creates some opportunities for marketers and having different places they can go to find different audiences, but also headwinds from the fragmentation of having so many different options of places that you can go and get in front of audiences. With that, we'll move on to section 102. And in this section, we will define the different building blocks that are being discussed as the new solutions for audience targeting and data privacy. And once we have the building blocks, Justin is going to help build the framework, so to speak, using all of these different new tactics and strategies. But before we do that, we want to start with the foundation of defining what some of these new solutions are. And so one of them is Unified ID 2.0. And this is a framework that was built to replicate the cross-site targeting that third-party cookies enable today, but with much stricter processes around how you opt into the UID, how that data is stored and maintained. And then we have a visual here to show a bit what this experience is, and we're not going to walk through every single step, but the idea with UID 2.0, and this has been really championed by the trade desk, is it gives consumers the ability to authenticate and log in to a certain publisher website and say, I understand how you're using my data to create a better experience for me. I consent, you can use my data. And then an ID is created that's unique to that user, that is not based on cookies. It's based on a hash encrypted, salted version of their email address. And that ID becomes the common tool that is used across the open web to serve that known user ads based on behavior that they are taking on certain sites. So it's one of the more one-to-one solves as we think about third-party cookies going away and brands having the challenge of how do I reach users on the open web based on information I have about them in my CRM or actions they may take on my website. The next solutions that are being talked about quite a bit are browser-based solutions. And Google has really come out with their privacy sandbox as the move they are making to come up with their solution to privacy. And the idea behind browser-based solutions is that data about one's browsing behavior stays within the four walls of that browser and is put into more anonymized groups that can be targeted that aren't necessarily a one-to-one deterministic fit. So the Google Privacy Sandbox and topics targeting is how Google has been thinking about this. And this is a workflow from their Chrome developer site, which essentially explains that the way topics are going to work is a person will have browsed and been to different websites within Chrome, and based on the combination of the data of what websites folks are visiting, what they're doing, Chrome is then going to group them into a handful of topics based on the behaviors that they've shown that advertisers can then leverage for targeting. Finally, platforms like Facebook and other ad platforms are developing their own server-side APIs which are essentially direct connections from the ad platform to the brand or the client server that bypass the web browser altogether. And so when Justin talks a little bit later about Facebook's conversions API and the targeting that it unlocks, when users say, allow app to track my data across apps, this is going to be one of the ways that Facebook and the brand website can talk to one another and not have to worry about the browser getting involved. Each of those three solutions are more or less direct responses to the third-party cookie is going away, or app tracking transparency has made it more difficult for me to connect the dots between what my users are doing on my website and then what they are doing relative to how I reach them on platforms like social. The last more encompassing solve that is being talked about quite a bit are customer data platforms, or CDPs. And CDPs are new software that sit on top of all of this different data that exists. It's more than just your traditional CRM, because it's incorporating signal data from the open web, from social platforms, bringing that information together to come up with a unified view of a customer that can then be used to segment different customer groups, learn about your customers, activate on different segments with different strategies. It's a much more robust solution than the CRM systems that have been used to date. And the last, this is a visualization of Telium's. Would have been helpful to have this as I was explaining that, but this shows essentially how the idea behind a CDP is that it's really sitting in the middle of all of this different data and can help brands have a richer understanding of their customers while maintaining privacy and governance. There's also a number of just terms that are thrown out there quite a bit when it relates to data privacy that we wanted to quickly identify before Justin builds on this foundation of these different solutions. So when we're talking about authentication, that's just the state of a user being logged into a publisher website or an app using their email address. As I mentioned for UID, that email address really becomes the foundation to create an anonymized ID that different systems can tie back to one user. But authentication is, I'm logged in, I'm authenticated, I'm telling you who I am because I'm logged in with my email. Consent management is a component of customer data management that is also becoming increasingly important, and a topic that we're hearing more about. This is where brands are making sure that they have processes and technology in place to manage what different customer preferences are as it relates to the data that they're sharing, the data that's being used, what they've consented to, and what they haven't. Identity graphs are databases that store all of the different identifiers that correlate to an individual user. And so identity graphs come into play when you're looking at certain walled gardens like Facebook or Amazon. They'll have their own ID graphs of users based on the information they have about them, that brands can then bring in their first party data and match them to that graph in the process that's called identity resolution. And so identity resolution is bringing together different data points from different sources in a way that you can understand a single view of a customer, but in a way that is data privacy compliant. A lot of this takes place in what are called data clean rooms. Amazon Marketing Cloud is an example of a data clean room, and this is a place where two different entities can come together to share data in a way that is completely privacy safe. So when Justin talks later about some of the ways that brands can use their first party data online, a lot of that matching is occurring in what is called a data clean room. There are also solutions that are outside of just your typical ad platforms where brands can come together and share data to come up with better insights about their customers. My final definition I'll leave you with is a little bit more fun in the form of this cartoon, but we're going to talk a lot in the next section about different types of data. So everything from zero to third party data. So zero party data is data that customers are actively providing to brands, often in the form of a survey or sharing what their preferences are. So in that example there, this gentleman took the running shoe survey and told this brand what their preferences are, and he's excited because the shoes are now on sale. This is different from first party data, which is a little bit more passive. It's not the customer going out of their way to tell the brand, this is what I prefer, but It is data that the brand is gathering of that customer based on activity they are taking directly with that brand. So clicks around on their website, actual purchases that take place, that's all brand-owned first-party data. Second-party data, as you can see in this example, is when two brands can come together and share common data that they may have across the same individual. So in this case, perhaps a gym company is in a data co-op with the shoe company, and they're able to target individuals who are in market for shoes with these gym memberships. Meanwhile, third-party data is data that is collected about an individual without their known explicit consent, which is why the individual in this cartoon is confused how he's even being served an ad about these running shoes. He's not sure how the computer knew that he was looking for running shoes specifically. And so now that we have covered all of those definitions and provided some context to what the solutions are and why those solutions were proposed, we're going to elevate the course, and Justin is going to talk about how we're applying these solutions across audience targeting needs for our clients.
Great. Thanks, Natalie, for setting the stage and breaking down some of these new and complex concepts. I swear, after being in the industry for more than a decade, it is hard to believe that every day there are new buzzwords and new acronyms for brands and marketers to master, but here we are. So as the head of Rise's Media Strategy Group, my goal is to not only kind of make sense and simplify all of these concepts, but really to help our teams as well as our clients understand how to build strategies around them. So in this section, like Natalie talked about or said, I'm going to try to start bringing some clarity into the impact of everything that we've talked about so far. In particular, how we believe that brands and marketers should really be thinking about the impacts, specifically when it comes to audience targeting. So in the most simple form, right, when brands develop targeting strategies, there are really two goals, right? You either want to remarket to people or you want to prospect and find net new customers. So when it comes to remarketing, brands can use a combination of zero-party data, as Natalie talked about, as well as first-party data, which is data or information that was collected from purchases, emails, site activity, etc. For prospecting, brands have historically relied on using a combination of platform-based data like interests or affinities or demographics that can be used or sourced from the platforms themselves, or third-party data providers that may have collected data on groups or cohorts of individuals based on things like cookies, identity graphs, panels, and more. That said, when thinking about developing a strategy around these two primary groups, it really comes down to what intent they have and how much familiarity they have with either your brand or the products and services that you as the brand offer. So the customers that are going to have the highest intent to engage with are those typically that have some form of data or information on, or known customers, right? These are people that have visited your site, they have expressly given you their information in one form or another. Then there are the semi-known types of customers. So those that may not have shown preference to your brand yet, but are still giving off very strong signals that might be in market right now for the products and services that you offer. And then lastly, there are anonymous audiences. So people that are completely unknown, they haven't shown your brand any preference yet, and we may not even know if they're in market right now looking for what you offer. That said, there are people that still match your target of who you want to engage with and connect with, and you still need to focus on building targeted awareness so that when they are ready to start engaging, they already know who you are and what you have to offer. Now, each of these intent-based audience groups will have different ways of being reached and messaged based on what data is available. So for example, right, your known audiences will typically be reached through a combination of CRM data as well as site behavior data. Whereas your semi-known audiences are typically going to be reached through a combination of platform-based data as well as different third-party data providers or segments that you want to take and import into the platforms to then leverage and reach that specific audience. And then your unknown audiences will typically need to be reached through some form of contextual strategy. Now, no matter what group we're talking about and no matter what data set we're talking about, each of these groups is going to be impacted by the deprecation of third-party cookies. How is really going to be dependent on the channel that you're looking to activate on. So before we go channel by channel, I want to preface, a few things. One is this space is constantly changing, evidenced by Google changing their mind on when they're deprecating third-party cookies at least 3 times already. These things can and most likely will continue to evolve. And then 2, everything that we're going to go through assumes that third-party cookies are completely gone. So this is a very future forward looking view of targeting. A lot of the things that we're going to go over can still be done in their existing states today. But again, we're really trying to help brands and marketers prepare for the future for when there aren't any more third-party cookies and we need to find new ways to engage with our different customers. So now you can go to the first one. So let's start with the most bottom of funnel way to connect with your customers, search. Right, so when it comes to reaching your highest intent audiences or customers, brands will still be able to use CRM data or emails as an example in a very similar way to how they do today, right? By uploading and pushing those customer lists into platforms. However, when it comes to site-based remarketing activities, that's where things will start to change. So Google has introduced and then reintroduced their solution to cookieless targeting, starting with Flock and then sunsetting that, and now are moved more towards what they call Fledge and Topics. So Fledge, another acronym, which is the first locally executed decisions over groups experiment, is Google's current proposed solution to enabling brands to show ads to users and bid higher for specific audiences who have previously interacted with an advertiser's website by assigning those visitors into different interest groups at the browser level, right? So I go to a specific brand's website, that browser will automatically classify me into an interest group, which then as a brand, I can use that data to continue to re-engage and retarget those people based off of those interests. For semi-known audiences or targeting that people fall into, that are typically used for Google's in-market or affinity audiences, or similar audiences as an example, brands will still be able to leverage those segments. However, instead of being populated based on third-party cookie data, they'll now be based on users getting bucketed into different interest groups, which Google is calling topics or interest-based advertising, if you've seen or heard that on the web as well. Now, for social platforms, many of them have already seen significant impacts to targeting capabilities based on a lot of the changes that Natalie talked about, with Apple's privacy updates, the app tracking transparency, IDFAs going away, and et cetera. However, when third-party cookies are gone, any data that's collected via an on-site pixel will effectively become useless from a targeting standpoint. So when targeting known CRM-based customers, much like within search, brands will still be able to push those customer lists into platforms to reach them, as well as to provide dynamic and customized messaging. However, for site-based remarketing activities, brands are going to need to rely on those server-to-server integrations that Natalie talked about, right? And this is still only for people that have allowed tracking when prompted with that notification that Natalie showed and Natalie talked about. Now, in order to reach those people, given that they have opted in or allowed tracking, we're going to need to use what's called the Conversions API, again, as Natalie talked about, needing to have that server-to-server integration. We've already seen Meta, Snap, and Pinterest create Conversions APIs. We believe that these are only going to increase in importance. Other platforms will continue to develop their own version of Conversions APIs or server integrations to allow brands to still re-engage with people that have come to their site and viewed or consumed some of their content. Now, for reaching semi-known customers, brands will still be able to leverage all the different audience segments that they do today, whether using behaviors, lookalikes, engagers, video viewers, purchase intent audiences, really get any in-platform audience that the platform itself is creating and populating are still going to be able to be leveraged for prospecting activities. And then lastly, for the completely unknown customers, right, this is where we've seen more emerging platforms like Reddit and reaching people through targeted communities based off of the interests that they may have exhibited or what you may know about your target audience starts to become much, much more effective. Now, Natalie talked about the rise of retail networks and the importance that they bring based on the quality of their purchase-based first-party data that brands can tap into. But not only do they have high-quality data, but because the large players like Amazon have logged in, authenticated users, they also serve as a very interesting component of a future-proofed audience targeting strategy. So for example, when serving ads on Amazon owned and operated inventory like Amazon.com or their Kindle or Fire products, etc., brands will still be able to use their first party CRM lists to continue to reach and engage customers without the need for third-party cookies. However, when it comes to site-based retargeting, even on owned and operated inventory, brands are going to need to start leveraging modeled audiences to connect data collected via the Amazon tag to continue to target them and engage with them. For reaching semi-known audiences, brands will still be able to tap into Amazon's high-quality first-party purchase-based data to create audiences based on in markets, lifestyle, affinities, etc., all based on the data that Amazon has, whether that's product detail page views, purchase history, etc. All of that data will still be able to be gained and leveraged in order to provide tailored experiences based off of what Amazon knows about that customer. And then the same is true for reaching unknown audiences. Amazon already has great contextual products and is continuing to evolve them. And we see that as a huge opportunity for brands to start tapping into and testing in order to reach and build that engagement with those more unknown, unaware types of audiences. So then lastly, when it comes to reaching customers across the open web, meaning through traditional programmatic tactics like display or native or connected TV, regardless of the intent group, whether that is a known intent group or a semi-known intent group, brands are going to need to rely on authenticated identity-based solutions like the UID or RAMP ID in order to reach those people effectively. Reaching unknown prospects will still require the use of contextual strategies, and we're excited to see the contextual space continue to evolve beyond just kind of the traditional form of matching inventory or site content based off of a list of keywords that you want to target. This space is evolving very, very rapidly, and we're really excited to continue to test some of the cutting edge innovations that are happening within the contextual space. Now, obviously, there is a ton of fragmentation here. And as I said in the beginning, each channel and really each platform within each channel has different capabilities and is thinking about the future of targeting in a very different way. That said, if you look at that first column all the way on the left for CRM data, nearly every channel will still be able to use CRM data in a very similar way to how it's being used today, which is why there's all this conversation about the importance of creating a first-party data strategy, being able to collect, harness, segment, and then deploy that data across these different platforms. However, given the fragmentation, governing and centralizing all of that different data in a single platform is becoming more and more important. And that's really where we see CDPs coming into place, or customer data platforms. Right, there are many big players out there today that brands can turn to in order to start having a single source to centralize, segment, and deploy audiences across platforms and channels. And this space continues to evolve as new players come out, as well as existing players continue to find better ways to enable brands and marketers to take their data and start to use it and deploy it at scale. Okay, that was a lot of information. And so what we thought we could do is really try to simplify this even more by walking through a couple of common use cases or scenarios for how we see kind of the future of audience targeting looking like. So for the first one, let's take the simple case of retargeting on a social platform. So how can a brand re-engage people that come to its site, browse specific products, and then retarget them on social with specific targeted ads based off of what they viewed or interacted with on their site? The first step is understanding, as I mentioned before, if that customer has opted in to cross-app tracking or not. That is, when prompted by Facebook, right, to allow tracking or not, did they accept? And if they did, the only way to retarget that person or group of people is to use the Conversions API server-based integration. If they did not accept tracking, well, then there's really no way that you'll be able to deterministically reach that person with custom tailored content that is exactly kind of what they were viewing on your site. Instead, that person will move from the known bucket to the semi-known bucket, and you'll have to rely on using platform-based data within Facebook to target them and serve them contextually relevant ads based off of the segment that you're trying to target. So let's
Justin,
do.
this made me realize that I forgot to define something in my many definitions for the group. Could you just provide a quick definition of deterministic and probabilistic when you're not deterministic?
Yes, thank you. So deterministic targeting is basically knowing 100% that I am reaching this specific person with a specific ad because I know that that person exhibited some behavior and there is some mechanism to specifically tie my action or my actions to that person. Whereas probabilistic targeting is more model-based data, where we say we think we're targeting that person based off of a lot of different other signals, and we're going to model out that behavior in order to reach that group of people, which is, again, different than deterministic, where we have 100% confidence that that is who we're reaching. Thank you, Natalie. Awesome. So let's do another use case then. So this one, we'll talk about using your first-party data on the open web. Specifically, let's say a spa that wants to serve a past purchaser a specific upsell service when he or she is on the open web, right? So let's start with the customer. It's somebody who had booked a facial at the spa. Let's say the spa has the customer's email and purchase history within the CRM based off of that previous appointment and interaction that they've had. So later on, let's say the customer is on his or her computer and goes to CNN.com. So the question is, how can I reach that customer with a specific upsell service? Well, if the customer has opted in to UID and CNN is interoperable with UID, then we can serve that customer an ad to come back to the spa and book a massage by having the UID connect the CRM data to a hashed, encrypted, ID-based profile. However, if that customer is not authenticated, then we wouldn't really have any way, again, of connecting that CRM record to that experience, and would instead need to really rely on contextual strategies to reach that person while viewing content related to spa services or massages, etc. Now, all that said, the best solutions are really going to depend on your business as well as your goals. So for businesses that rely on customer acquisition, they're going to need to spend a lot more dollars and a lot more effort in that semi-known intent group to reach highly qualified prospects, right? They don't have a ton of really high quality, large volume of first party data. And so instead, they're really going to need to focus on leveraging platform-based data, as well as even potentially contextual solutions to identify new, highly qualified individuals. On the other hand, for brands that have, let's say, really robust loyalty programs that thrive on repeat purchases and upselling products and services to existing customers, kind of like that second scenario we went through, well, they're instead going to need to spend a lot more dollars and time in that known intent group, focused on things like first-party data segmentation, activation across different platforms, being able to match and serve customized, personalized, and tailored ads to different first-party audience groups based off of the behaviors that they've exhibited or their preferences that they've shown. So really, again, it's ultimately going to depend on what your business is, what your goals are, how you've engaged with customers in the past, when starting to think about what the future strategy is going to look like in order to continue to engage and reach your types of audiences.
Thanks, Justin. So we are going to take it home here today for the episode 1 lesson of the binge watch with a few key takeaways. We could call it a final exam. And really, all of these takeaways are equally important. The first one, which Justin just talked about, is there is no one size fits all of what the right audience data strategy is going to look like tomorrow, depending on your business and depending on your goals and depending on what platforms come up with next. It's going to be an iterative process of testing and prioritizing and measuring. It's really important, as Justin mentioned from that chart, to gain consent to be able to market to your customers using their data from your CRM. And the best way to do that is to be transparent and to provide a very clear value and communicate that value of why it's worth it for that customer to say, yes, brand, you can market to me. Here's my data. I trust you're going to use it to my benefit as well. And that's an area that we are very much encouraging brands, if they haven't been thinking about it, to start now and coming up with that first party data capture strategy. This is changing all the time. We've had so many conversations just leading up to this webinar with different platform partners, asking questions, running these scenarios by them. And the solutions really are changing as we all learn together. So by no means is any of this the final answer, but these are the answers of where we're at today, and we're excited to continue testing and learning, which brings us to the final takeaway, which is it's really important to start thinking about how you're going to build a data framework that allows you to compare all of the different types of audience data that you can use to understand where to spend your next dollar, depending on what your goals are. On the right side of the screen here is a snapshot of Rise's cross-channel media optimization platform, Connects. And what you are looking at specifically is an audience view, where we are looking at different types of platform audiences. So in the case of what is highlighted here, it might be someone who was on our website and viewed a video that we are trying to remarket to, or someone who is a first-time customer, brand new to our brand. And having different strategies for how we talk to these different audience segments, and also understanding how we can test different audience sources, is going to really separate the more sophisticated marketer from the marketer of yesterday when we're looking forward. We've been doing a lot of testing with our clients on some of these new data sources, and we've seen some really exciting results when we've been able to measure, does Amazon DSP stack up against this particular type of segment on a different platform? So definitely encourage you to start thinking about how you can put a framework together to allow you to test into these different audience sources and be able to answer the question of what works best. Justin, any other takeaways you want to share with the group, or does that cover it?
No, I think that covers it. I would say I would just underscore the last one again of these things are constantly changing. However, we have seen a lot of really great successes for the ones that we have tested. And so I would encourage brands to continue to find ways to test these new solutions, these new frameworks, as we believe that these are some of the solutions of the future, and the sooner that brands can start testing them and building a strategy around them today, the better that they will be set up and prepared for tomorrow.
Awesome. So next week's class is going to be building on this topic. So today was all about the targeting side of the future. So how we reach audiences when we don't have cookies. Another huge part of the conversation is how is measurement evolving as we enter a privacy first world. And so I'm excited. I'll be joined by a different guest riser to talk about Rise's incrementality measurement solutions and how we use that data to drive better decisions. So definitely stay tuned for next week's class. And we did not have time for questions today, quite a bit of content to get through. Thank you so much for staying with us and for attending. That said, if you do have outstanding questions, scenarios you're curious about, we've probably left some between ourselves and the rest of the group working on this here at Rise. Our contact information can be found here. We also are sharing all the time the latest updates that we are learning about as it relates to audience targeting, what the different innovations are. We just put out a great piece about Unified ID 2.0 on our blog. If you'd like to subscribe to our blog, QR code is right there. Otherwise, thank you again for joining us, and we hope to see you again soon.